Authorities in Ukraine are reporting a massive Russian aerial attack across the country. The northeastern city of Kharkiv is among the hardest hit, with at least 6 injured. The strikes are targeting the country's energy networks, which have led to regular power blackouts. Ukraine is now in its third winter of war. DW correspondent Max Zander reports from the capital, Kyiv, on how communities are coping with the hardship and disruption to daily life.
After dark, the steady hum of diesel generators can be heard all over the city. Business owners have found ways to deal with the frequent power cuts caused by Russia's attacks on Ukraine's power grid. And so have families. Daria and Serhiy are just returning home with 3-year-old Vasya and Sonia, their golden retriever. They live on the 24th floor.
I once measured how long it takes, without bags, walking calmly like this. It takes me about 5 minutes.
Living this high up means that when the power is down, it's not just the lifts that stop. The water pumps are out too.
We bought ourselves barrels to collect water. We have 20 liters here below, 20 liters here, 40 liters here, and here we have our large caliber 80 liters.
Water, heating, and internet can be affected by the planned power cuts that last for several hours every day. People who can afford them, power lamps and small devices off batteries.
We're into our 3rd year of this war, so people are adept at using different solutions. They're keeping entire apartments going. Looking at our house from the street, you might not realize we have no power. The lights are on in many flats. We're lucky here. Some older houses are dark and people are still sitting around candles.
They worry about not being able to take their daughter to a shelter during the air raid when the elevators are out. But they know that others find themselves in far worse situations.
There are many large cities, like Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, where there's also no electricity. Those cities along the front line are full of pensioners who stayed. These people have nowhere else to go. They can't afford to. These are the people who are the most vulnerable, and they are the ones who are suffering badly right now. And we simply cannot even imagine how difficult it is for them right now.
Ukraine has limited air defense capabilities. Until that situation improves, the residents of Kyiv will rely on their ability to adapt to another winter of Russian attacks and power cuts.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Mikhail Krutikhin. He's an independent energy analyst in Oslo. It's good to have you with us, Mikhail. Russia has hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure again. Do we know much more about what they were targeting this time?
They are targeting power generation, power lines, and basically the main target is the population of Ukraine, and it's not any military targets or some strategic goals, but mostly population. It's destruction, it is tragedy in families, but I believe that Ukraine can survive because, well, basically they are finding some solutions such as distributed power generation, portable or movable generators, and I believe that Ukraine is prepared to survive and to resist the occupation.
You say that they're finding ways around life as generation would normally happen. Is Ukraine getting better, though, Mikhail, at defending its energy generation and transmission sites, or is it all just about finding other solutions at this point?
Yes, I think they are defending it. I have my sources in Ukraine who report that after airstrikes and missile strikes on power networks and even, for example, compressor stations at the main pipeline, gas pipelines, they immediately start repair works, and in many cases they manage to re-establish the networks and continue power supply to the cities and the villages.
After nearly 3 years of war, what percentage of the Ukrainian population has reliable energy 24 hours a day as they did before the Russian invasion?
I think if the war ends suddenly, I'm not a prophet, I do not know when it happens, but it would take about, maybe half a year to re-establish 24 hours power supply to all the population in Ukraine, with the exception of some villages and cities which have been totally demolished by Russian artillery fires and air attacks.
Mikhail Krutikhin of the Independent Energy Analyst in Oslo. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Joining us now is Suria Jayanti, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a lead expert on energy policy. She has worked extensively with Ukraine's energy sector, both before and during the war. Thanks so much for joining us. We've seen in our report how Ukrainian families are adapting to blackouts, and the human toll is evident. How bad is the energy situation in Ukraine right now?
I think it's important to differentiate a little bit in terms of the daily life between what people in Kyiv are experiencing and, as the last segment showed, what is being experienced in other cities or even more rural parts of Ukraine. Kyiv's air defenses, coupled with its relative wealth, means that it has the ability to access those generators. And many of the Russian attacks, the missiles, for example, December 12th to 13th, 200 drones, 93 missiles, most of which are shot down. In the rest of the country, the situation is quite a bit more dire. That said, the overall energy situation remains very, very deficient. Ukraine is running a roughly 15 to 30% loss of power generation at any given time, given almost monthly assaults by Russia against its thermal power plants and other generation facilities. It's running on average about a 20% national deficit, which means either that there are blackouts or that it fills that gap with imports from the rest of Europe at a considerably higher price. So in general, the situation is one of quite severe shortage, and rolling blackouts have become something that everyone everywhere is extremely used to.
Do you think Russia's strategy of targeting energy infrastructure is actually working to weaken Ukrainian morale? I'm just wondering how prepared Ukraine is to withstand another harsh winter under these conditions you've described.
I'm tempted to say that there are no people better at winter than the Ukrainians, and especially entering the third winter of the war, with Russia having kept its primary strategy, making Ukraine as unlivable as possible by eliminating most of the heating and most of the electricity generation. Nonetheless, I don't see any immediate evidence that it's having a serious effect on Ukrainian morale or its willingness to continue the fight, continue its national defense against Russia. There have been some recent polls that show that the number of Ukrainians interested in some form of peace settlement has increased, but it's still definitely not at a majority by most accounts. And so although Russia is making daily life much harder, the general adaptability of Ukrainians, and at this point, the resilience as well, has coupled with an astonishing effort in the energy sector to keep everything lit and warm as often as possible and for as long as possible. So there are
Right.
technical teams working both public sector and private sector around the clock to fix the damage every single time Russia strikes.
Got it. Now, I understand that 60% of Ukraine's power generation has been knocked out, thereabouts. Ukraine's ability to rebuild has now been overwhelmed, at least for the immediate future. Can Ukraine rebuild its capacity quickly enough? And very briefly, thank you.
Absolutely, it can. It's going to need a lot of help, both financial and equipment. The EU and the US have been giving money specific for energy reconstruction. And in the long run, Ukraine is looking at making its energy industry one of its leading pillars of the reconstruction, because it does have the ability to produce clean, cheap energy beyond anything that Europe can do.
Got it. Suria Jayanti, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much.